Welcome back, Rabbi Dr. Eliezerbrodt. It's a pleasure to be with you as we endeavor to record a conversation about Birchas Kohanim. We're learning Masechta Saita now. We just learned in the Mishnah Masechta Saita a list of things that are in Lashon Kodesh that have to be said dafka in Lashon Kodesh, other things that can be read b'chol Lashon. Birchas Kohanim is mentioned there, and the Gemara spends at least a couple dafim discussing Birchas Kohanim. So what better time to discuss a unknown controversy that took place in the city of Brody in Galicia. This is a place where Eliezerbrodt spends a lot of brain power and brain time researching that time of history. And this is about an episode with Rabbi Efraim Zalman Margolis, who, as Rabbi Brodt will tell you, is one of his 5 top heroes, if we can use that expression. Rabbi Brodt, how are you today?
Baruch Hashem. Baruch Hashem.
So before we begin, you want to give maybe a 1-minute backdrop on Efraim Zalman Margolis and which sefer may the audience recognize his name from?
We are going to do it. We're going to get to it soon. Unless you want to do it right now, we could do it right now. Which would you rather?
Whichever works for you.
We'll do it better soon. We'll introduce the topic, get to the topic, and then we'll get to Efraim Zalman shortly.
Excellent.
Momentarily. Okay. Yeah.
So let's jump right in. Birchas Kohanim in Eretz Yisroel, they do it every single day. In Chutz La'aretz, we only are zeichet to have Birchas Kohanim on Yantif. Perhaps give us the sources for this minig and these halachas of how Klal Yisrael is noig b'zman hazeh.
Okay, so first, first we'll begin like this. I'd like to thank Mechon Ad Hena, which a few years back I was part of this Mechon under the Professor Moaz Kahana at the time, and I did a lot of research relating to Galicia, and that's how I got to researching this particular topic. From this topic, it sprung into Rabbi Efraim Zalman Margolis, to working on producing a whole book about Rabbi Efraim Zalman Margolis. Sadly, it has not yet been published, but the spark of the whole story and everything that I spent about 3 years researching Rabbi Efraim Zalman Margolis was through this Teshuvah that we're going to learn about today. And that relates to the sugya of duchening daily. Birchas Kohanim, depends how you'll say it. I'm going to probably switch back and forth. I apologize. Duchening, Birchas Kohanim, whatever it is. But basically, I live in Eretz Yisroel. In Eretz Yisroel, we're zeicha that if you have Kohanim and your minyan, not always do I have it, but you're able to be mekayim a special mitzvah of Birchas Kohanim every day. In Chutz La'aretz, Ashkenazi Jews only duchen on Yom Tovim. The Mashal Svardim in Chutz La'aretz, I believe they do duchen daily. I recall seeing somewhere that Rav Steinman, when he came to America the first time, they made sure that he take him to a Svardim minyan at least some of the time, so you should hear Birchas Kohanim.
Absolutely. I failed to mention at the beginning that the Svardim here do Birkat Kohanim every day, and I recall hearing that Reb Chaim also, I think, made sure when he was in America. I could verify this, but I recall that as well. When I was back and I was in yeshiva, I had a friend who Reb Chaim used to stay by his home. He was related to him, and I think they used to have a special minyan there where they had duchening.
Mm. So basically the question is, and this is a question that a lot of people asked over the generations, is why did it stop? So there have been various attempts also to revive this mitzvah. Most famous about the Gra. We'll get to it at the end. But the subject of this particular presentation is mostly about a controversy that took place in the early 1800s in Brodt in Galicia. It involved a shul in which Kohanim began duchening every day. A very unknown fact, but it actually seemed to have happened. Now, so the backtrack for a minute is like this. The Rambam writes, is a mitzvah for Kohanim levarich haKohanim es Yisrael b'chol yom. It appears that most earlier Rishonim held like this Rambam and was done daily. At a certain point in the 14th century, it seems this practice was discontinued in some regions. A short while later, the Maril wrote an explanation for this change, even though it's a mitzvah min haTorah l'chayra. The Beis Yosef brings this down, and he writes, praiseworthy are those in Eretz Yisroel and Mitzrayim who do duchen every day. Meaning to say he did not like to reason the Maril. The Ramah in Darkei Moshe, and also later on in the Mappa in the Shulchan Aruch, he writes, defending the Ashkenazi custom in Eretz Yisroel, that it's weekday, Yidden are under a lot of stress to make parnasa, so they're not so besimcha, so we don't duchen. Even on Shabbos, they worry a lot about parnasa. So it's because of simcha. Only on Yontif, when there's an additional mitzvah, v'samachta b'chargecha, do we duchen. Now, this is a reason that the Ramah suggests. L'mashal, the Magen Avram, when he talks about not duchening, says, he brings down that there were people in his time that when Yontif fell out on Shabbos, they didn't duchen. Mean to say, even though there's so few times that an Ashkenazi Jews do duchen in Chutz La'aretz, there were still times that they would try to find excuses, so to speak, why not to. So the Magen Avram says one reason, he doesn't hold that he should, but he says why? Maybe it has to do with because of the Tefillah of Rabbeinu Shalom, where he's davening for the Chaloimis, and which is usually recited during Birchas Kohanim, and just like we don't say Avinu Malkeinu on Shabbos, but it's a limit chus, but not that that's what one should do.
You mentioned Yom Tif coinciding with Shabbos, about duchening and not duchening. I recall, and the listeners could maybe you yourself know, let's say Shabbos on Shabbos Chol Hamoed, there are certain Chassidim, I believe, that also duchen. I think the Staminik is not to duchen. I recall Satmer, could be others. They duchen on Shabbos Chol Hamoed.
I don't remember about that. That's interesting. That is an interesting idea. I don't remember. But the Taz, he writes Lamashal Yontif that falls on Shabbos, you should duchen. And he brings down even a Adam Gadol that also told us Tzibur Dafka to duchen. Now, and other Paiskim, Rabbi Yaakov that Deres writes about this, that they find it very hard that people, the few times that you're supposed to be duchening, looking for kulas, why not to duchen? Lamashal, the Shalom Meshav writes, he visited Krakow in 1854. He davened in the shul of the Ramah, and on Yontif that fell on Shabbos, they did duchen, and they told him that this is the minhag in all of Krakow. Okay. Anyway, be that as it may, Lamaisa and Chutz La'aretz, it's not done on a daily basis. Why is this so? So this is not the scope of today's shir, but Professor Eric Zimmer collected in all about the minhag in his work called Olam Kiminagei Noyeg, and he deals with collecting the different, from the times of the Rishonim that talk about it till recent literature about it from all different achronim about it. Okay, now one of the most famous tshuvas on this topic is written by Rabbi Efraim Zalman Margolis. And it's first printed in 1818 by Rabbi Efraim Zalman Margolis in his Tshuvas Beis Efraim. Because Rabbi Efraim Zalman Margolis is the main character in the story today, so I'm going to just give a drop of introduction, which is what you referred to earlier about Rabbi Efraim Zalman Margolis. He's born in 1760. He dies in 1828. Now, he's very, very prominent both in the Litvische world and in the Hasidische world. Lamashal, his classic work for the Yemei Elul and Tishrei is the Mata Efraim. He was not the typical gadol. He was a very wealthy man. He did not serve as a rav, but he was considered from the greatest gedolim in his tkufa. He was one of the gedolei hadar beli guzim. As a youngster, he writes about his youth in his introduction to his work on Treifus. So here we could already get a glimpse about him. This is him writing it, not a story that someone's saying. I remember as a child of 9 years old how my father would study with me. He would wake me up early, and I learned almost half a shas by heart with him. We would go for walks, during which he would tell me various chedushim. He would also test me by asking me a question from a sefer of a specific shalos and shuvas, and he would see what my solution to the question was. But Kitzer, already at a young age, he was close contact with the gedolei olam of his tkufa, such as Noadim Yehuda, writing to him when he's in his young teens. The Shargis Aryeh, Rabbi Shai Berlin, Rabbi Fol Hamburger, Chaim Volozhiner, Mishkanis Yankiv, the Chassam Sefer, Rabbi Shlomo Kluger, just to list a few. He wrote extensively in all types of topics, l'mashal. And not only that, many of it was published in his lifetime, most likely because he had the funds to be able to publish it. He also published manuscripts of others that were found in his vast, incredible library. Some of his writings was Shari Efraim and Hilchos Kriyas HaTorah, Maalot Efraim we mentioned, Tiv Gittin, which in Mirz Hashem we will hopefully speak more about in Masechtas Gittin, which is an encyclopedia about names of Gittin, Rosh Efraim, which is 4 volumes on Hilchos Treifus, Beis Efraim, hundreds of Teshuvos on Dal Chelki Shulchan Aruch, Shem Efraim, which is devoted to Rashi on Tanakh, Zera Efraim, which is an extensive Be'indika Pirish on Psikta. Anyway, returning to the Teshuvah, that Rabbi Efraim Zalman publishes in 1818. This can be found in Orach Chaim, Beis Efraim, and it says it's Sheilovav. He says L'chvoid Yedidi, and he doesn't say the name of the person. Most of the Teshuvos of Rabbi Efraim Zalman Margolis does say the name. Here it doesn't. And then he says that B'dvar Asher Shol Kvoi Toirasoi B'dvar Haminig Anoig B'chol Medinas Elu, in all our places Shelo Ya'akayin Anoisim Kapeim Kiyim B'yantif Levad V'yesh Mi Shali B'nakfa B'davar Lefi Shemitzes Anoisim Atayu Shi Anoisim B'kapeim Kol Yoim V'yesh Makom Yisoi L'Minig Hazel V'yesh Kaich Levatloi Imloi. Basically, what's pshat? How did this minig get abolished? So now Efraim Zalman goes and he has a few pages and he comes to defend the minig that developed about it. So first he says, it's a minig already for over 500 years. He says, "Lamashal de Maril, shehaya Rabam shall kol gedoyle Medinas Ashkenaz va'agar darkei Moshe b'shulchan aruch ba'agah." That so therefore it's already an accepted minig. V'nir midivreim she'ein lazuz me'ah minig. It's an accepted minig, not to duchen. So first, it's not, even if we don't understand it. This is a whole parsha which we're not going to go into today, which is how a minig gets accepted once it gets accepted, and this is a very prominently negay in Rabbi Efraim Zalman's writings, but we're not going to discuss it today. Anyway, he does discuss some various defenses. For example, he says there's a dion in the Gedolei Teshuvos of the various Gedolei Achreinim about the yichus of today's Kohanim, so we don't duchen as often in order to avoid a possible bracha batala, and he offers different justifications from a wide range of sources. Over 60 svarim are quoted in here. Many different historical materials some are rare, demonstrating his historical expertise, which we'll also get to shortly. At first glance, it seems that we have over here a typical tshuva. Rabbi Efraim Zalman wrote a tshuva, and because he was asked a question, and we have no idea who he wrote it for. And there will be no reason to assume there's anything more to the story. And this is how he prints it. He printed it. It wasn't published by his Einiklach later on, and they did some censorship. Okay. The Maisa, this tshuva is in this topic. It's very much quoted by Achreinim, and like the way the world works, Baruch Hashem. In recent discoveries, we have Baruch Tumim Frankel, contemporary Rabbi Efraim Zalman Margolis. Recent was published a bunch of ha'aris of his on Teshuvas Beis Efraim, and this tshuva he has a bunch of different things that he takes issue with what Rabbi Efraim Zalman writes. But this was published a few years back. Now, fast forward, this is the story, let's say in 1818, and going onwards, if someone was learning the sugya. Fast forward to 2004. In recent times, basically, the sale of rare documents have become rather popular at auctions. Incredible story that needs to be told. One day maybe we'll tell part of the story. Daily, sometimes weekly, auctions take place all over the world thanks to the internet, where these documents are sold, and they're sold sometimes for large sums of money. Sadly, many of the documents disappear after being purchased, and the important information they contain is lost. June 22nd, 2004, an auction house in Yerushalayim writes in their auction catalog a little earlier, which they released it, they said, we have this manuscript of a Teshuvah of Rabbi Efraim Zalman Margolis in his handwriting that was not published. It's about 17 pages, and it's relating to this Teshuvah that we quoted in the Beis Efraim, and it's an incredible story there's no documentation anywhere else that such a thing happened. And whoever buys it is going to be able to get it. And we're not going to tell you who the Teshuvah was written to. Our researchers figured this out and whatever, fine. So, Baruch Hashem, we have today that there are a few collectors who, when they buy the materials, they do release the materials afterwards. One such collector, who I have admired the Akaras HaToifrim Bechlal for his work, and this particular tshuva I have unbelievable Akaras HaToifrim, is Reuven Dessler of Cleveland, Ohio. He has published 6 beautiful volumes called Shnais Dar V'Dar. They contain valuable information about Jewish communities in many different regions. The fourth volume of the set, he published the 17 pages without censoring anything. And here, once you open up this thing, you see it's almost double the amount of material than what we have. But more than that, all of a sudden, a whole different thing happens that we did not know about beforehand.
Is someone allowed to ask, why wasn't this in the Teshuvah? Is it perhaps wasn't meant for public consumption, and you can't learn halacha from it? How do you relate to these types of findings?
That is a very good question. There's no clear answer to it. Lamash over here, Efraim Zalman Margolis published his main points. He included in his base of Efraim. But over here, once you see, when you hear the story, it's taka interesting. Maybe no one should have bought it and no one should have published it. But then I would have been out of book. So I have to say that I have a karas atayv to Rav Dessler, and I hold that the way the story seems to end, it ended up b'shalom. It was not one of these controversies that it sounds like, as I'll be able to prove pretty much, it sounds like everything was b'shalom. So I guess in this particular case, it's okay. Okay, now what happens? It turns out we first know it's addressed to his friend. It says a chassid by the name of Rav Shmuel. So I'll just point out right away, we're not talking about a Chassidish Yid, a Chassid in Rabbi Efraim Zalman's terminology, and when we now know who this Yid was, it means a person who was mamish, who did things lefnim mishuras hadin. Okay. Anyway, Bekitzer, what do we have over here? I'm just translating loosely from the document, and it's unbelievable, all the different lines and the wordings and everything, but obviously, Mirz Hashem, if I'm Zoicha to publish my book on the sugya, you'll be able to see much, much more by Richos. It says like this: I've heard that you have instructed the Kainim in your shul to duchen every day, in contradiction to what's written in Shulchan Aruch about our region, Galicia. One who does so is strange, and thus many are wondering, why are you doing such a thing in our community? Brodt was a chashav, a city in Galicia, which is full of Talmidei Chachamim, Ki yadua, the Chachmei HaKlois even, without seeking counsel from them. No, you didn't ask anyone, and you're doing this. Furthermore, you have instructed that this be done from now on, and you wrote this respectively. You wrote very not bakavadik about my master and grandfather, the Ramah, whose Piskei Din we fully accept in these regions as if it's heard from Sinai. I'll quote the exact Hebrew lashon about that soon. I was asked to inform you that we do not agree with your actions, and you should recant by issuing a statement that your previous instructions was a mistake. It's obvious from already reading these lines that this tshuva was not a response to a question. Rather, the Mata Efraim, Rabbi Efraim Zalman, was writing a letter to this person because of what was being done in his shul, and pretty much the Kehila was getting involved and saying, no, you can't do this. Now you have to understand, Rabbi Efraim Zalman Margolis, although he wasn't the Rav of the city, he was the top 3 askanim in the city. Everything that took place in the city, he was involved with. And basically, probably him and the other people, they held that there's a problem. And we're going to discuss in the duration a little bit why he held it was a problem. But first, who is this Rav Shmuel? So based on the pieces of information, we're able to tell it's a Yid Rav Shmuel Oster. He was a known chassid, again, not chassidish, but as a tremendous Oved Hashem, who died in 1829. We know about him. It seems Rabbi Efraim Zalman Margolis is already good with his grandfather. He learned Kabbalah with this Yid's grandfather. But and his grandfather was part of the famous Chachmei HaKlois way back in the time of the name Yehuda, but that's not beyond the scope of today's presentation. B'kitzur, they write about this Yid. He was Rav Chassid v'Kaddish Tzadik Yisoid Olam. Okay, now he wrote 2 Chiburim, which we'll discuss in a second. Just to understand, and this is how I know that the fight obviously ended b'shalom, the great Rav Shlomo Kluger, who was very, very close with Rabbi Efraim Zalman Margolis, before he became a Dayan in Vilna, not in Vilna, sorry, it's a slip over there, but for obvious reasons. But anyway, Rabbi Shlomo Kluger was the darshan in the city of Brodt. So he used to give hespedim. So he gave a hesped on this Reb Shmuel. We have it in manuscript, an incredible. The manuscript is sitting in Hebrew University, and Bekitz over there, you see him referring to him as Mamash Kaddish Elyon. He's a chassid People used to come to him to daven. He used to learn. Reb Shlomo Kluger writes, he used to loimed yoimim v'layla mispalyon v'layla. Kol gufay have a kaddish v'tar. He stayed at home. He didn't have any tivus of olam hazeh. This is Reb Shlomo Kluger writing. Reb Shlomo Kluger is not one to exaggerate, accuse. He says also that he also stresses in the thing something interesting, that people that would come to him with the tzitzis, he'd come to his house, he would right away check their tzitzis to make sure that the tzitzis is kosher, whatever that story behind that is. And the last nakuda is, he ends off his hesped. We just suffered the great loss of Rabbi Efraim Zalman, and then we got the next person who we lose is this Reb Shmuel. Anyway, so it sounds like this fight, whatever happened, it seems that the Reb Shmuel stopped duchening in his clothes. Anyway, Bekitzer, he writes two svarim. One's a sefer Teiras Adam, and one's a sefer Ksav Yosher. They're very Kabbalistic, based a lot on Zoyar, Arizal, Mishnas Chassidim. And in there we find, Lamashal, a quote. He says, Birchas Kohanim is a mitzvah that we can't do daily. But he says it's because of shvacha reasons. Then he says it's because they didn't have the Sifrei Kabbalah. If they would know the greatness in what it says in Kabbalah's farm about the Chashivas of Nesias Kapayim, they wouldn't have come up with such svachas svaras. And he says all different types of lashonis in his farm, not only about Nesias Kapayim, but he has a lot of interesting things that one can find in this farm. So what we see from here is that it's not just that he wrote this in a sefer. And when was this farm published? They were published, I believe it's in 1810 and 1799. He actually went ahead. Not only did he just say that the taina of the duchening, the limud zchus shvach, he went ahead and put it into his kehila. It could have been a small kehila, and they started duchening daily. Okay, Now, first, Rabbi Efraim Zalman writes, and this is in the parts that are not in the published parts. He says, "How could you say as if the Ramah? It sounds like you're saying the Ramah wasn't a makubal, didn't know anything about Kabbalah. The Ramah was a baki niflin Kabbalah. Anyone who knows his sefer Teiras Ha'ila. He's not only that, we have his Ha'aris on Zoyar, which Kinireh was based on his shiurim he gave in his yeshiva on Zoyar. Then he writes a long list of gedolim that were great chashiva kohanim." He says like this. Not only was the Ramah who says like this, but the Sma, who's a Chaim, the Shach, Sheris Yosef, Reb Naftali Katz, the Shev Yankiv, Reb Chaim Rappaport, Reb Rafal Hamburger, my Rebbe, the Chassid Shabakuna, Reb Yitzchak Isaac, Av Bezin of Kretz, and many others. And these people were great Mekubalim. To say on them that they didn't know about Kabbalah and the Shefa and the Ilamais, that what happens with Birchas Kohanim, and they didn't do it. And then he lists some others. And Bekitzer, there's all different lines and Nekudas to be aimed on in this document that are not included in the Teshuvah. Then he ends up criticizing him on many other things. It sounds like that it wasn't just that he started to reinstitute that they should do duchening daily. In the Svarim already, he's very into Tefillin the Rabbeinu Tam, and basically in his shul he wanted people, even the Amaratzim, to wear Rabbeinu Tam Tefillin. Then he held that he says some type of lashon even to hold your tzitzis in your hand the whole day, not just during Kriya Shema. Also, you're supposed to picture in your mind as if you're being Yotzet Cheles. These are different things that this Reb Shmuel writes about in his Svarim. And it seems not only did he write about them, but he acted upon them and had his kehila of not necessarily Talmidei Chachamim doing. Now, each one of the practices that Reb Shmuel encouraged, Rabbi Efraim Zalman shows why it's wrong. He goes at great length, and this we see Rabbi Efraim Zalman's incredible Yediyas in Kabbalah. He goes, you think you have Shad and Arizal? Wrong. You're using a faulty edition of the Sefer Arizal. I have in my possession a manuscript of Arizal. The kids are all different things come out from here. We get to see Rabbi Efraim Zalman as far as Kabbalah, v'chulu v'chulu. And it seems is at the end he says, if you don't stop what you're doing, we're going to come out against you with all our power and everything. If not, I won't publish it. So Kinireh must be that what happened is that he got this letter, he read the letter, he saw Rabbi Efraim Zalman means business, he saw Rabbi Efraim Zalman writes. Maybe he didn't agree with Rabbi Efraim Zalman's reasoning, I don't know. But it seems he must have stopped it, because then when Rabbi Efraim Zalman publishes it in 1818, he takes out all these parts, pages of material. So And also, as I said, from Reb Shlomo Kluger giving a beautiful hesped about him and not saying anything about Efraim Zalman Margolis being against him, it sounds like the fight stopped. So it must be that he stopped in his kihila, his small clothes, whatever, the various things that Efraim Zalman was against. Now the question is like this. First is there any way to figure out when this tshuva was written? So the answer is yes. We could figure out because as I said, he quotes over 60 svarim, but you have to look when are all these svarim quoted. Figuring out, he quotes the Bir Hagra, which is published in 1803. And then he quotes a piece, so basically means is the earliest, assuming he got straight from Vilna, hot off the press, the Bir Hagra, and he's quoting it, so it's going to be somewhere around 1803 is the earliest period of time. Now, but we're able to extend the years even later, and that is as follows. Rabbeinu Tam, he quotes, as I said, there's a lot of stuff here relating to minig, the power of minig, bichlal, and Rabbi Efraim Zalman quotes a whole important nukudis from the Sefer Yasher of Rabbeinu Tam. Now, I already mentioned in my shiurim that we have given on Old Daf about Chaim Kanievsky, Rabbi Efraim Zalman, and the Sefer Yasher, who's very into the Sefer Yasher. But it was only published in 1811, and from the quotes in this tshuva, it's quoting from the Chidah. If it was quoting it from that he saw himself, he would have said it. He wouldn't have said, I saw it from the Chidah. So it's clear, it seems pretty clear that we're able to go as far as 1811 is the earliest it would have been published. So it has to be that it's taking place somewhere between 1811 and 1818 when Rabbi Efraim Zalman actually publishes it. Akopanim, why is this Nagea? We'll see in a moment. Now, but the question really is, even though I said 17 pages and a lot of things are happening in these pages, what got Rabbi Efraim Zalman so upset? Let's say Rabbeinu Tam Tefillin. What does Rabbi Efraim Zalman Margolis hold about Rabbeinu Tam Tefillin? Lamaisa, Rabbi Efraim Zalman wrote a small Musar Sefer called Beis Tefillah, which he brings down the Reishis Chachma, and he says that you should wear two pairs of Rabbeinu. You should wear Rashi and Rabbeinu Tam. So not only that, in Shari Tshuva, which again beyond the scope of today, his role in the work Shari Tshuva, is it his brothers, is it both of them? Over there it also talks about wearing Rabbeinu Tam Tefillin and says Kol Yireh Hashem v'Choshei Shmoi could wear it. So all of a sudden, he's writing in this tshuva. He's upset that Reb Shmuel is instituting in his clothes that people should wear it. Very, very requires hesber. Okay, so one of the things that comes up is it sounds like that what bothered him, and maybe not only him, was that that this Reb Shmuel decided this, and you're doing something. It's not you're doing something for yourself. If it's accepted in Shulchan Aruch to do something and you want to go against it, even if you hold that you're right, you have to discuss it. You're sitting in a city. Brodt is not a shtetl. As I said, Brodt had this klois with elite gedolim, tremendous talmidei chachamim. So even if Efraim Zalman Margolis is not a balgaiv over here and he's saying you didn't come to speak to me and learn, chas v'shalom. But this is a city it's a city, not a shtetl, with many gedolim. You want to reinstitute doing something that's not accepted in Shulchan Aruch for a few hundred years. You speak it over and learning. It sends the wrong message, so to speak. Okay, it seems that was one thing that bothered him. Now, I would like to take this even a little further. It sounds like from reading into, if you're familiar with Efraim Zalman Margolis, the Ramah by him is unbelievable, and this is what sort of got him upset on one level. And then I'm going to show that there was even more to the story. Basically like this, a sidetrack for a second in this story is like this. In 1900, a small work of Rabbi Efraim Zalman Margolis was printed for the first time from manuscript. It's called Maalot Hayuchsin. What happened is like this. A family member asked him if he could put the family's yichus into writing. It wasn't so uncommon in those days. There are such documents, and Rabbi Efraim Zalman, it seems he went ahead and did it. Now, it's not just, okay, here's my yichus, I'm an einikel of this gadol, I'm an einikel of this gadol, whatever. No, not at all. So there's a professor, Chaim Gertner. He analyzed this type of writing in the 1800s. He breaks it down to there's different styles, and there's different types. What I was able to see, at first glance, someone might say, what's this Maalot Hayuchsin? It's similar to other works that we have of which even big people used to write. A lot of times you find in a Teshuvah Sefer, they'll say, and my yichus is, I'm related to these gedolim. Okay, it's fine, but no. If you look at this work very carefully, which I definitely could say, I spent a lot of time on this chibur. It's a small chibur, but I spent a crazy amount of time on it. You'll see as follows. Almost half the work is devoted to his great-grandfather Ramah. he devotes space to other gedolim, and he says a lot of important things throughout this work. But he's meshundik into the Ramah. The Ramah is mamish. He talks about tons of historical aspects about the Ramah, with using rare books which he owned. He had a meshundik Sfarim library. He had first prints. He had manuscripts, and he knew everything relevant on the sugya. He talks about all different types of things. I'm not going to go into all different examples, but it turns out that this is the first extensive work written about the Ramah, but it remained in manuscript until 1900. Now, up till now, we always thought that when does the historical people start writing historical works, like books about the Ramah, so to speak, it's more like in the 1860s. And it means, say, until the 1860s, if someone wanted to find out information about the Ramah, you opened up your kosher svarim. What's the kosher svarim? The Tzemach David, the Seder Dairis, the Chidah, and they have material about the Ramah, but a few lines. Then all of a sudden, in the 1860s, without getting into what happened, but various monographs were printed, some first in newspapers, then in books, some were written by maskilim, some were written by frum Tayrudika people, and Lamashal, in 1874, a book on Krakow called Ir Tzedek, there was a collection of important material in the Ramah, and all different things. There's a lot of material about the Ramah that they pulled from different places, some manuscripts, some from the writings. Turns out that Rabbi Efraim Zalman beat them all out, because he dies in 1828. He wrote this book way before all this is happening, but no one had it, so they didn't know about it. Anyway, but when you see how much he devotes to Ramah, how much he talks about the Ramah, and Bechlal in his Teshuvah l'shainis that he has about the Ramah, then you could begin to understand that already you're starting up with the Shulchan Aruch. You're not starting up with, it's not only that that you didn't ask advice and everything. It's accepted. It's a psak in Shulchan Aruch. End of discussion. You can't just go and decide you want to do for your kehila something else. And this is a very important point. And this was Kinireh, one of the things that got Rabbi Efraim Zalman Margolis very angry. Now, besides for that, he raises a bunch of different points, which is not for now. Okay, now. But I would like to go step one more nakuda into this story, and it's as follows. It's well known in the 1770s there was a ban against the Chassidim by different gedolim. There was various, so to speak, complaints about them. Now, some of these bans, what's the significance of them? It was signed by none other than the Gaon of the Rebel Yomi Vilna, the Gra. Reading through the various complaints, one can see that some of it, again, there's a lot. Not necessarily do we know the whole story. There's obviously parts that today we don't know as much as the Chassidim write about it and the Litvaks write about it. There's a lot of the story we don't know. But we see that there was an issue with masses learning Kabbalah. Not only learning Kabbalah, they daven l'mashal from a Siddur Kavanas Arizal, which it's not for Hamoinam. If you're a Makubal and you're tremendous Talmud Chacham and you want to do it, that's one thing. But for a person who doesn't understand it, this was very much this bothered a lot of people. L'mashal, the Klois of Brody, they learned intense Kabbalah. They were people that learned Gemara, Ashitoisis, Paiskim, Halacha, G'dai Le'olam Avir, such as Nadim Yehuda, Chaim Sanzer, many others. But they also learned Kabbalah, so they weren't people that held not to learn Kabbalah. They learned Kabbalah, but they held it has to be done by someone that's roy, someone who's that he's mali b'kreisai b'shasu paiskim. So they issued a ban, and the Klois of Brody were one of the groups that were against it, and they did this already as early as 1756 against people that were doing it, relating to another controversy. Now, in 1772, when it was collected, the various bans. It was published in a booklet against the Chassidim. Recently, this booklet sold on auction for incredible sums of money, as it's very rare, because Chassidim burnt most of the copies that they were able to find. There's not too many copies around today. Now, what was the fear of the Gedolim at the time? Was the danger that could come from people not roy who are learning Kabbalah. This was not a far-off fear, dating to Shabtai Tzvi in 1666. Me say it's not that, because in 1666 there was a Shabtai Tzvi movement and we're nervous about it. It was really because in this time period, in the 1770s and even later, and that's what we're going to get to right now, there was something going on in this region, not in a Vite region in Timbuktu, in the regions over here that affected them, and that was the Frankist movement. They did terrible averis, and they were very active in this Tkufa. And now just to point something, and that's why the years of this whole controversy play a very important role here. And that's as follows. In 1799, the Rav of the city Prague, one of the biggest cities of Europe at the time, Rabbi Eliezer Fleckles, gave a series of 3 drushes devoting to blasting the Sabbatian, the Frankism movement that was going on in his city, the biggest city, one of the biggest cities of Yidden in Europe at the time. In 1800, he prints one of them. He learned much about his shittas, about the sugya, from his great Rebbe, the Noiden Yehuda. And he writes as such in the introduction to this Chibur Ahavas David that I learned from different things that I learned from my Rebbe, the Noiden Yehuda. And he says not, and he refers to a famous drasha that my Rebbe gave about the sugya. But Kitzer, he gave a drasha, a few drashas, talking about this terrible thing. And he wasn't talking about, because there's a city in Timbuktu that they're being nechshol. It was in his city. This was a very big problem. Now, just understand, after the drasha, we have accounts that say riots erupted in the city. Even though he didn't mention names, but the mob knew who he was referring to. Someone was nifter. There were people that attacked it seems like he was tied to these groups. The people attacked it. There was a woman who was targeted. There was all different things happening in shuls because the people were known. Now, the point that I'm trying to bring out is that in this city, which Rabbi Efraim Zal Margolis is those years, he's active in those years. He knows Rabbi Eliezer Fleckles. He knows what's going on in Prague. He has direct ties what's going on in Prague. How, it's not important for today, but basically they know, and it's not only in Prague, they know about this movement, this terrible movement called Frankism. And in this drasha that Rabbi Eliezer Fleckles publishes, he stresses a bunch of times in a kuda, which is people were learning Kabbalah and they didn't master Torah before. They didn't master Shas Paiskim first. People that were in Rai were learning Kabbalah. And we know from other places that he has very sharp stance about learning Kabbalah b'chlal. And people have said, it can't be, he doesn't really mean it. But if you know what the Yehuda also said about these sugyas, and the Noiden Yehuda also knew Kabbalah ganz fine. As I said, he learned in the Klois of Brody, Kabbalah even. They knew about it, they knew Kabbalah, they understood Kabbalah. The problem was not about learning Kabbalah. The problem was who's learning Kabbalah. If it's in the wrong hands, the wrong people, this is one of the most dangerous things. And this is what bothered people time and time again. Now, so what happens like this? In Prague, this is what bothers them. Just to suggest, the Rabbi Eliezer Fleckles, he gives the drush in 1799. In 1800, he publishes it. First episode, he published it right away. The answer was because the Averis that the Frankist movement did was such prosta Averis, he couldn't even say them in the tzibur, but he wanted to say it. So he held, at least he could write it. So he publishes it, even though the drush as a whole, and Rabbi Eliezer Fleckles is known as a Meir de Darshan, he probably spoke about different things. I highly doubt he speaks as graphic as he does in the writings of what the Averis were. And that's why I'm suspicious, not suspicious, I suspect that he went and he made sure to publish it. It was a Meyerdika problem in this big city. Now, Brodt is another big city. Now, again, I'm not accusing Chas v'Shalom that this Reb Shmuel is a Frankist or anything like that. But the Kehila, his people, when you read the Teshuvah of Rabbi Efraim Zalman, you'll see Rabbi Efraim Zalman says, the people in your Kehila, they're Amaratzim. They have no business doing different things that you do. You say if you ask Rabbi Efraim Zalman, should Reb Shmuel, this Makubal, put on Rabbeinu Tefillin? He has no problem with that. He's an Adam Gadol, as you could see from Reb Shlomo Kluger's Hesped. His problem was that you're making masses you're suggesting for masses to do different things in Inyani Kabbalah. That's what bothered them. And this was what I'm suggesting is one nakuda in this fight that we Ada Yom don't know about, or you know, when you ask about it, it's better not to ask, and you shush. There was no real fight with Chassidim. There wasn't. Who knows? I'm not getting involved about that, but sadly, we do know there was something up. Now, just to say one other Maramakam about this, that also is from this period of time in this region in Galicia, in these cities, it just came out in the past few days, a incredible work from a Yid. He's writing this in the late. He was involved with the Gedolim fighting the Frankist movement. They had a debate because it's a whole different. Not for now, but they basically had a debate. They were going to burn the Talmud, and this person, his name was Dov Ber. How do I say his name? It's a good question. Dov Ber Bolichover. I just botched up his name, so whatever. Dov Ber for today until I can get my teeth back. Dov Ber. Because of this Dov Ber, he wrote a autobiography about his life. He dies in the early 1800s, but he also put out a book. He also wrote a book which was not published, only now came out from manuscript, called Divrei Bina. Divrei Bina is a whole book where he deals with Shabsai Tzvi, talking about what Shabsai Tzvi is about, the whole history of the Shabsai Tzvi, and in depth about the Frankists. But he's saying it out firsthand. What were the problems that was going on? The debate he was with the Gedolim about it, and furthermore, not only is he writing in these regions and you see it's a real thing, it's not as I said, it's not a thing in some Timbuktu city very far away. It's real Lamaisa. This is a person in Galicia writing about it. This is Rabbi Fleckles writing about it in Prague. These are all, they're in communication with each other, so it's very, very relevant. So also over there in this book Divrei Bina, you see also the masses were very into learning Kabbalah, and he also says they didn't know how to learn. This is another nakuda. We're not going to be marich more about it. We were marich too much about it as it is. But Kitzer, fast forward, is that this was the fear l'chayra of Efraim Zalman Margolis, that you're seeking to go reach madregas and do things, the hamoin am. That was what was bothering him also. Now, l'mashal, the Chayi Adam, another ish, ties to Vilna, ties to Prague, like Yehuda. He also, in his tzava, he stresses to his kids not to learn Kabbalah. He's not against Kabbalah. He was into Kabbalah. He knew Kabbalah. He knew Kabbalah at a young age. And as Agad Shal Pesach, he shows he's murdered into Kabbalah. He's also not an anti-Kabbalist. He's anti that if you're learning it when you're not in the proper madregas, that's going to cause problems. And this is a theme that the Netziv deals with Barichos in many places in his writings, in Shir Hashirim, in Parshas Shmini, Parshas Kairach, other places he brings up, where people seek to reach, they try to reach madregas above them, and that caused a tremendous problem. Okay, now, so this is possibly the fear of Rabbi Efraim Zalman Margolis in why he came out so strongly against it. But what I'm suggesting is that he listened to Rabbi Efraim Zalman Margolis. Now, just to end off with two last points, because otherwise I'm going to get too many emails mentioning this thing. This was not the first attempt to revive the custom of duchening every day in Ashkenazi circles. Just to list a few of them, and that's how we'll end. Back to Shabsai Tzvi. People were doing tshuva for all different types of things that they had been makel up till now. So in the Portuguese Ashkenazi Kehila in Amsterdam, 2 chazanim began duchening every Shabbos. But then what happened is they found out that Shabsai Tzvi is a fraud, so debate broke out if they could continue the practice. So the Kitzer Tzitzis Neuvel Tzvi, or the Tzitzis Neuvel Tzvi as he's referred, Rabbi Yaakov Sapertus, was asked, and he replied, they should go back to the original minig of Amsterdam and not duchen every day and Shabbos. Although the country, he had a bunch of reasons for it, and he brings down the Ramah. He says the Ramah said already that we don't. He says now that we know Shabsai Tzvi is a fraud, we're mamish not besimcha. Now, others held, not like him, and they held that even though the minig, they started it because they thought Shabsai Tzvi is real and everything, but L'maisa, the real halacha is that one should duchen every day, so L'maisa you should. Anyway, this is a whole discussion, and how could you do it? This also ties into other sugyas, which we're not going to get into right now. Now, fast forward, Aruch HaShulchan writes something very cryptic and not typical for him on this topic. He says, there's no proper reason for our custom to not duchen every day all year round, but what can we do? It's as if a voice from Hashem telling us we're not allowed to duchen. He says, I received a tradition that 2 Gedolim in previous generations attempted to reestablish the custom, but when the day arrived, the attempt was disrupted, causing them to declare its exer from Shemayim. What's he referring to? So the Radal writes that he heard that the Gra wanted to reestablish the minig, but on that day that he decided to institute it, he was taken to jail on some pretext. He therefore understood that he was not to pursue it. Similarly, the Netziv writes, Chaim Volozhiner also wanted to reestablish the minig. On the day of his decision, half the city burned down. It would appear that these two events are what the Aruch HaShulchan is referring to. Yes, Nosson Kamenetsky has a whole arichos in his famous book, The Making of a Gadol, suggesting a whole story, a theory, what really happened and why Chaim Volozhiner, what went on in Volozhiner, why half the city burned down, whatever. These are all theories. With not real proof. L'maisa, Rabbi Yisroel Shklover, a Talmud of the Gra Soif Yamav writes in his Passer Shulchan that from the day he established the Koil in Yerushalayim, they duchened daily, following the sheet of the Gra. Okay, now, just to end off, it's interesting to note that there are references to daily duchening from different visitors when they went to Yerushalayim. Taka and Yerushalayim, everyone did duchen, such as we have from Rav Bar Tanura, the Shla Kaddish, Rav Moshe of Prague, Rav Yosef Schwartz, the author of the Tefillin of R in 1837. And then when you see in Tzfas also that people did, it seems at some point in Tzfas they might have stopped. Okay, now, and just to conclude, there was one other attempt to reestablish this mitzvah of Eretz Yisroel, of the mitzvah outside of Eretz Yisroel in Ashkenazi circles. And that was done by none other than Reb Nosson Adler, who dies in 1800. He was the Rebbe Muvak of the Chassam Sofer, a legendary Gaon Olam and Mekubal. He was a Chaim. He began to duchen every day in his private minyan in Frankfurt. For this and other practices that he instituted, he was put in Chaim in 1779 and again in 1789 by the city's Gedolim, including another one of the Chassam Sofer's great Rabbeim, Dafla. Okay, so this, we see that there were attempts by others, and so when you say Dafla, I'm sorry, the Nosson Adler, the Gra, Chaim Volozhiner, they did want to do it, but for whatever reasons it didn't work out. And then we have what was unknown. Maybe today, a lot through this year, a lot of people will now know that there was an attempt. But Lamaisa, we go. We don't do anything once it's in the Shulchan Aruch Paskind. Obviously, that's its own sugya. Do you ever argue on something in the Rama? But with Efraim's R Margolis, comes out that one should not duchen daily in Chutz La'aretz. That's the accepted meaning for hundreds of years. Okay, obviously we could go down many, many different rabbit holes and many, many different sidetracks and whatever, but I have Rachmanis. Oh, wow, and I was able to keep it even much less than I originally thought. Okay, very good.
Okay, thank you very much, Rabbi Brodt. Looking forward to hearing more. Once again, questions, comments, suggestions, and most of all, to support the work of Rabbi Dr. Eliezerbrodt, please feel free to reach out to us. Dedications, sponsorships are welcome. eliezerbrodt@gmail.com to reach out to Rabbi Eliezer. And you can reach me at Schwed, MSCHWED, @OU.org. Thank you very much for listening, and we hope to meet again shortly.